Can the Catholic Church reform itself? The four-day conference on sexual abuse, where the Pope himself is presiding, marks the latest attempt by the Vatican to hit the reset button. Since the first time the Church addressed the crisis under John Paul II, the floodgates have opened with an ever-growing list of cases and cover-ups. How to prevent the Church from attracting predators. To restore faith, the hierarchy must contemplate its culture, critics would say its culture of secrecy. How open must it become? The Vatican this week, for the first time, acknowledging it has guidelines for priests who secretly father children. Is it time to go further and roll back celibacy altogether? Well, this all goes to the heart of what characterizes the world's largest organized religion. On that score, what do the faithful themselves want? Today in the France 24 debate, Can the Vatican Reform? Joining us, Father Laurent Stalla-Bourdillon, who is the Director of Information for the Paris Diocese. Good evening. Thank you for joining us. I want to thank as well Tom Heneghan, freelance correspondent for Religion News Service. How are you?
Hello, nice to be here.
From Dublin, author, activist, and survivor of clerical abuse when he was 14, Colm O'Gorman, thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Good evening.
France 24 correspondent Seema Gupta is following that conference from Rome. Thanks for being with us, Seema.
Good evening.
The France 24 debate on Facebook and Twitter, hashtag F24debate. You have 4 days to come up with reforms. And as Seema was telling us earlier, the expectations are high. Heneghan has more.
Top bishops from all over the world gather in the Vatican for the first day of a landmark summit on sexual abuse in the Catholic Church. But lurking in the shadows of the conference, skepticism from some abuse survivors, for whom the event resembles more of a public relations exercise than a genuine push for change. Perhaps in anticipation of such doubt, in his opening remarks, the Pope recognized that victims expect substantive action to be taken.
The holy people of God look at us and expect from us not simple and obvious condemnations, but concrete and effective measures to put into place. We need concreteness, so let us begin our journey armed with faith and the spirit of maximum boldness, courage and concreteness.
After the Pope's opening remarks, Cardinal Luis Tagle of the Philippines, widely considered a contender to be the next Pope, delivered an emotional keynote speech. Focused on the theme of responsibility, he acknowledged the Church's failure to address crimes perpetrated by Catholic officials.
Our lack of response to the suffering of victims, even to the point of rejecting them and covering up the scandal to protect perpetrators and the institution, has injured our people, leaving a deep wound in our relationship with those we are sent to serve.
The four-day summit is centered around three themes: responsibility, accountability, and transparency. It will include talks on the best practices to adopt to confront abuse, group discussions among bishops, and a ceremony for abuse survivors.
And perhaps an image that shows how high the stakes are. On the eve of the conference, the Pope, at a general audience, was introduced to Marek Lesinski, who says when he was 13, he was abused by a priest. He traveled from Rome, from his native Poland, to deliver a message about Polish bishops neglecting pedophilia cases. There you see the Pope pausing in prayer and then kissing the hand of Lesinski. What's your reaction to that moment, Colm O'Gorman?
I don't want to disrespect either Pope Francis or indeed the hand of the man whose hand he kissed. But I'm afraid we've seen these kinds of gestures before. I mean, we've seen church leaders wash the feet of victims. We've seen these moments of supposed atonement and acknowledgement of what's happened in the past. But what we haven't seen is a simple telling of the truth. I mean, Pope Francis talked about acting in the spirit of maximum courage. I would like 25 years after I first began to find the courage to come forward and talk about my own experience of being raped at the age of 14 by a Roman Catholic priest, who the church had known was a paedophile before they ordained him, and who continued to abuse with impunity for well over a decade until I reported him to the police. I would like to see a pope finally just tell the plain truth, the well-established truth now, that the cover-up of the crimes of clergy, the rape and abuse of hundreds of thousands of children, of vulnerable adults, by the clergy, was directed and implemented at the highest level of the Vatican by popes, by cardinals, and by heads of the Roman Curia. So when we hear conversations, as we will over the next couple of days, about accountability, the key question is, how exactly does the Vatican hold bishops to account for the cover-up that it directed? And until Pope Francis finally takes the radical step of telling the truth about this issue, and how can we believe that they're going to respond to the substantive issue? And that is the cover-up and facilitation of these crimes by the institution of the Roman Catholic Church, underpinned by its laws and its norms, which has gone back a couple of millennia. And in your opening comments, you talked about how these issues were first addressed by John Paul II, as if somehow, this issue emerged in the 1990s or even in the early 2000s. As a matter of fact, the first church laws to address sexual crimes by clergy, by priests, were introduced at the beginning of the 4th century by the Cantabile Viaria between 311 and 313. So despite all of the protestations from successive popes, from cardinals and from others, that this is a modern issue, that this is an issue that's infected, in their view, the Western Church, this is a historic issue, an issue that the Catholic Church has known about for centuries and has covered up for centuries, and sadly that continues today.
All right, but here the Pope, it's unprecedented, convening a 4-day conference squarely about the topic. He calls for concrete and efficient measures. What are you expecting from this conference?
The same thing I've been expecting and calling for well over 2 decades now, and that is that a Pope will tell the truth. It's not complicated. The Pope needs to simply say, as head of the Roman Catholic Church, as supreme pontiff, as absolute monarch of the Vatican City State, as the Bishop of Rome, he acknowledges the proven, now evident fact that the cover-up of the crimes of clergy, the rape and abuse of hundreds of thousands of children and vulnerable adults, was implemented and directed by the Vatican at its highest level, and that he is prepared to acknowledge that, to open the Vatican's files, and to ensure that the institution is held properly accountable. Everything then flows from that simple, evident, proven truth. And the absence of telling the truth, I learned very early on from the very same church, is a lie. To refuse to tell evident, simple truth is to deceive and is to mislead and to lie. So we need this Pope and the Vatican to stop lying. We need them to stand for truth and commit to actual change. The radical change is simply the telling of the truth, because everything will flow from that.
The radical change is simply the telling of the truth. Father Laurent Stalla-Bourdillon, you agree?
Well, yes, I agree on the fact that the institution has been failing, has been covering up, and has been trying to protect itself. And now time has come, and although the Church has to be ashamed of what has been happening, today, as a priest, I feel proud of the Pope Francis. As he says, there is no point in having an institution if this institution has to cover up evil. And he says that the root of the problem is not outside, is within us. It's inside the Church. So he called all the bishops of the world to he accounts them for responsible for what is happening. And the root of the problem is within our own hearts. And in a way, we use the power, the spiritual power, that has been incredibly mistaken. All the mistakes we did with this incredible power we had. So now time has come, and I think the major responsibility for the Church is a kind of conversion within a true conversion of the heart. The true mission of the Church is not to protect an institution. He, as a Pope, has nothing to do with an institution that would be a fake, holy institution if nobody trusts people within, leaders and bishops and priests in the institution. And now time has come to say that we cannot keep on having this kind of power and respectability of the Church.
So, should there be, for instance, we're talking about, I'm using the Pope's words, concrete and efficient measures. Should there be a standard procedure whenever there is sexual abuse? universally around the world.
Universally, they will be. They will work on very hard to have major procedures and also following up of these measures. Time has come to stop having everyone was treating these kind of problems within the house, trying not to keep the silence on the things and say nothing, because we hate scandals, but we are the cause of the scandals.
All right, lots of reactions, Tom Heneghan, on the hashtag F24debate. This one, it had to start somewhere with someone. Now's a good time for the Pope to get the ball rolling. We're waited long enough for concrete and effective measures. Any longer and the church will collapse under the weight of its closed eyes and plugged ears. Does the church have closed eyes and plugged ears?
Yes and no. That's the big problem. And if you say, as Colm O'Gorman did, they have to tell the truth, once they tell the truth, what happens after that? I think a lot of the problems are they often know what's going on, but the implications of that are very strong and could shake the institution quite strongly. For example, if you say the bishop should be responsible, well, I think the church will not be credible until it starts to fire bishops as managers. Bishops have two roles. One is a spiritual role and one is an administrative role. And a lot of them, we now see, have been very bad administrators, but they tend not to want to do that. So they have to not only tell the truth, but then start to take action about it. And that's where they're afraid.
Right. Who makes the decision? Seema Gupta, you're our Rome correspondent, but you're also our Vatican correspondent. And officially, it is just for people who don't follow as closely, it's an independent state. And as Colm was saying at the outset, its leader, the Pope, is also a head of state, a supreme monarch, as he put it, I believe. And so you're getting to the heart of just what is the Catholic Church here.
Yes, indeed. And I think it's interesting to note when you have the issue of what's in canon law, and that's church law, as opposed to civil law. So you have the church functioning within different countries all around the world. And each country has a particular law, has a particular way of dealing with this issue. Certain parts of the world have very established laws. Other places, the issue of abuse is taboo. There's a stigma around it, and so it's difficult to even address or talk about. Or even the issue of homosexuality is illegal in certain countries, so how are the bishops and the priests there supposed to deal with it? And I think it was in that spirit as well that Pope Francis summoned the bishops from all around the world so that they could get together here to talk about this one issue and deal with the issue in terms of recognizing that they're functioning within those civil jurisdictions as well. In fact, one of the 21 guidelines that the Pope handed up to the bishops at the start of this summit talks about the need to inform civil authorities. So I think it's going to be interesting to see this issue because as we've heard, victims, abuse survivors are saying that they want the archives of the Vatican to be made public, to be made known to the law enforcement officials of those countries. So interesting times at the Vatican. I have to say that it is the media interest at this event is quite extensive. It's almost to the level of a conclave or a papal election because I think it's significant that a lot is riding on this. Some say even Pope Francis's entire papacy is riding on not just this event, but on this particular issue. And he has said he's got a zero tolerance on child sexual abuse, and he wants to see this summit a start of doing something, as he puts it, concrete to deal with this.
All right. So first of all, is the Pope's papacy on the line with this summit? And secondly, there are a few more issues, but I will first answer that question.
The credibility of the church is clearly in danger. So the body of the church, as any body that we have, is being governed by the head. So if the head is ill, asleep, rotten, corrupted, the whole body is corrupted.
And opening the archives? Good idea?
Sure, obviously it will have to be. It will have to be. In every single country, there will be commissions that are going to go through every archives in every diocese. We have to make it true, make the truth till at any cost. That's what he says. We have to protect the children at any cost. And we don't protect the institution. This institution is serving the word of God. So we don't protect an institution, but the credibility and the possibility for people to hear a word of life. So no institution, the sake of the institution is not in the case. We have to make it clear. And in the 21 points proposed by the Pope, there is the seventh one, which is establish specific protocols for handling accusations against bishops. So for the first time, the one in power has to be accountable for what happens in his diocese. So very probably...
As Tom was asking, as an administrator or as a spiritual leader?
Both of them. If he doesn't care for people in an administrative way, as giving the first step, which is justice, how can he be? How can we trust him in a spiritual way?
And you heard Seema Gupta mention how there's varying attitudes according to which country you're from. The French newspaper Le Monde picking up on the fact that, for instance, no Africans as part of the preparatory committee for this conference. Why is that?
We are facing the tremendous challenge of handling the power of in an institution who is mainly serving. So the one who has the power is in the church, the one who serves the little one, who protects the little one. But it happens in all structure that you have corruption that transform the power in kind of places where nobody can touch you. You can touch everyone, but nobody can touch you. So in every human's mind, even in a bishop or in a priest mind, you can have this kind of corruption. So you have to be transparent, you have to be poor, you have to be truthful, and you have to be helped to do this. Someone has to help you to do this. And very probably there is a very strong spiritual conversion to start in the church.
All right, we're going to pick up on those points when we come back. We'll take a quick break. You're watching the France 24 debate. Welcome back, or welcome if you're just joining us. It's the France 24 debate. We're speaking as the Pope has opened a 4-day conference, an unprecedented one where he's actively taking part in sessions devoted to child sex abuse within the church. With us to talk about it, Father Laurent Stalla-Bourdillon, who is the Director of Information for the Paris Diocese. With us as well, Tom Heneghan, freelance reporter and correspondent for Religion News Service. From Dublin, author, activist, and survivor of clerical abuse, Colm O'Gorman, welcome back. And from Rome, covering it all for us, is correspondent Seema Gupta. Just before the break, we were discussing this issue of how far you go in establishing some kind of a mechanism. Let me ask you, Tom Heneghan, can you do it? When you heard Seema Gupta in part one say how there's blowback in some countries, can you have a universal mechanism? If the Pope is the final word, can he say this is the way it's going to be?
The Catholic Church Catholic means universal, so it's all around the world. And you have different cultures. And in some cultures, especially Western cultures, now the push is for transparency, but the culture is ready for that as well. In other countries, in other regions, they're not so transparent. And either there will be pushback against transparency, or transparency could be misused if you say, oh, we must hand over every single priest, pedophile priest, to the authorities. But if the authorities will turn around and execute him for that, because maybe homosexuality is illegal in that country, or they're very against the Catholic Church, or anything, then, of course, the bishop is going to say, well, the rules say I should hand these people over, but that I'm handing them over to a certain death. I can't do that. So the interesting thing that Father brought out here was that they were talking about procedures is not talking about tribunals. There was talk about having a separate type of court for bishops. And a few years ago, that talk, it looked like the Pope supported that, and then he backed off from it. And I think it's because that would be the step that would say, we are now going to hit the structures of this institution. And some countries are ready for it, other countries aren't.
Colm O'Gorman, what do you do on that score?
Well, I think first of all, it's important, whilst I understand the context that these comments are being made, it's important to recognise when we talk about the rape and abuse of children, that's what we're talking about. We're not talking about homosexuality or heterosexuality. We're talking about the rape and abuse of children, which is a crime everywhere. Of course, I have some sympathy for the situation where in certain jurisdictions, civil legal mechanisms and civil legal structures are not particularly robust, and there would be concerns about the administration of justice in those jurisdictions, and that needs to be addressed. But can we set aside one very significant misunderstanding? There exists a centralized system to respond to these issues within the Roman Catholic Church. It has existed for centuries and for decades. The Code of Canon Law in 1917 set out the procedures that were to be adopted by bishops when complaints of certain crimes committed by clergy were reported to them. They were required to report those crimes, and that includes sexual abuse of minors, directly to the Vatican. The Vatican would then decide, the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith would then decide how these cases were to be handled. That was restated in 1962. It required an extraordinary level of secrecy, that all involved, victims, witnesses, investigators, and everybody else, be sworn to an oath of absolute secrecy, statistical secrecy. A breach of that resulted in automatic excommunication. And indeed, those rules were updated and restated in 2001 by Pope John Paul II in a document called Sanctorum Tutelum. So for a very long time, the Roman Catholic Church has had a single procedure, a single universal global process to respond, and it required bishops to behave in a certain way, but it required them to cover up these crimes, to report them to the Vatican, who worked to make sure that they never emerged into public consciousness. From 1985 on, for instance, we saw another dynamic emerge within the Church at the global level, and that was diocese after diocese in country after country across the Catholic world, taking out specific insurance policies, not general, specific insurance policies, to protect the institution from the cost of litigation that might be taken by people who were raped and abused by priests. They acted in 1985, between 1985 and 1990, to protect their money, and they did very little to protect children. And when that was discovered, when these stories started to emerge, stories like mine, they said we were fantasists, we were liars, we were out to attack the church. And it gives me no pleasure at all to say that Francis doesn't represent the kind of departure that I and others hoped he might when he was elected. Just yesterday, Pope Francis said that those who constantly criticize the church are friends of the devil. He is indeed, he elevated a bishop in Mexico in June, who said, whilst he was here in Ireland last year, that those who would criticize the church should recognize that we have skeletons in our closets and that we better be careful lest we trod on our long tail.
Colm O'Gorman.
Let me make this final point. When Francis was here in Ireland last year, he tried to tell people here that he didn't know anything about and didn't even know that abuse happened in what were called mother and baby homes or Magdalene laundries, where women were incarcerated if they were seen to offend against the sexual morality and rules of the church. This despite the fact that there are very few people on the planet who haven't heard of Irish Magdalene laundries, and despite the fact that he himself met with one of those victims directly himself in Rome. So I'm afraid Francis is not truthful on this issue. Francis still demonizes victims and those who challenge the way the church has dealt with all of this. So it makes it very difficult to believe that there is a significant departure, because we're seeing yet another unprecedented moment or unprecedented summit and commitments to change without anything robust underneath them.
You mentioned those remarks that were made on Wednesday by the Pope. Let's listen to them. He was speaking at the Vatican on the eve of this conference. The Pope saying, if you love the church, mistakes should be corrected. But he also branded those who spend their life accusing the church as, quote, friends of the devil.
Who in the Bible is called the great accuser? Who?
Non capisco. Non sento bene. Il diavolo. E coloro che si passano la vita accusando.
The devil. And those who spend their lives accusing are not the devil's children, because the devil has no children. But they are friends, cousins, and relatives of a devil, and this is wrong. Mistakes should be reported in order to be corrected, because when mistakes are reported, when flaws are denounced, the church is loved.
How should we interpret those remarks, Tom Heneghan?
That's a hard one, because he talks about the devil now and then, and for a lot of Catholics, they don't quite understand what to make of it. I think he's just trying to play down the expectations for this conference, because he cannot come up with as strong a solution as so many people want.
Is Colm right the way to that he interprets it? That it's basically telling people to quash
this has been going on now for several weeks, that they've been trying to damp down speculation about what will come out of this. Some positive things will come out, but it will not go as far as is needed.
Father Laurent Stalla-Bourdillon?
Yes, in the church, actually, the Pope is saying, be careful in the way you wish to make the church holy and to make it pure again, because it is easy to have people saying, and some bishops and cardinals saying, this is the way it has to be done. Take this decision, then it will be done, and it will be finished. We'll have this problem will be over. Actually, what the Pope is saying is, don't listen to these people, because this is a never-ending mission, a never-ending exercise to have the priest and the cleric hearts to be constantly purified. A priest can start his life as a priest in a perfect manner.
So it's wrong to say that he's saying that if you criticize the church too much, you're friends with the devil.
No, it means if you think that some kind of measures that you know what to do and the others don't know what to do, but if you listen to me, you will see it will come back in a perfect way. It's a pure illusion. In the heart of a priest, in the heart of a bishop, you can have at a time corruptions coming in. It's not a kind of one forever and the place is. It's an everyday attention. It's an everyday consideration. And if you don't take this in account, at some time you say, well, I'm getting on very good, it's fine, and you don't see that corruption is getting in.
Colm O'Corman, how will people in your native Ireland interpret those words?
I think they will interpret them literally. I mean, we have to listen to the things that people say and understand what they've said, rather than with, and I mean this with absolute respect and with, for want of a better word, real love, because I understand how challenging this is for those within church who are trying to find a way to see a way forward. So with respect to your guest, the good father, I don't mean this in a negative way, but rather than trying to find a way to justify what is pretty blatant. The Pope said that those who criticize the church are friends of the devil. That echoes statement made by a Mexican bishop, elevated by Francis just last summer, that those of us who accuse the church of crime should be careful lest we stand on our long tails. And please let's not imagine for a moment that the Vatican's refusal to call out and challenge and condemn those kind of statements, whether it be made by a bishop, by a cardinal, including cardinals who blame homosexuality for this, or indeed by the Pope himself, is some sort of benign powerlessness on their part. I'm in a country where clerics and theologians of great integrity who dare to speak about the idea, for instance, of married priests, who dare to talk about the role of women in the church, were silenced by an edict from the Vatican. They were banned from passing any public comment or from undertaking any public ministry. That's the kind of power that the Vatican has. And yet it never silences voices, no matter how senior, no matter how junior within the hierarchy, who attack and blame and judge and demonize victims. And we've seen that same language now from Francis as well. I cannot understate the kind of harm that language does. This is not complicated. The rape of a child is a profoundly evil act. It is a very serious crime. To cover up that crime is an unspeakably evil, corrupt thing to do, and it should be a crime if it isn't in most jurisdictions. That's what happens within the Roman Catholic Church. The Pope needs to stand back from lofty, convoluted words and theological constructs and just name the simple damn truth. We've been asking for decades. The fact that he continues to refuse to do so has to be taken to signal something.
Yeah, just a brief word on the context here in France, because this week you've had this film that's come out by François Ozon. Thanks to God, it won the jury prize at the Berlin Film Festival last weekend. The attorney for the priest tried to stop the release of the film, which came out in screens. The judge said no, it can come out, because the actual case is up before a jury at the start of next month. Your thoughts on the context of the idea that with this film coming out, and a lot of the attention, of course, is not on the priest, but also on his superior, the Cardinal of Lyon, for covering up.
I think that's the critical point, if I could interrupt, because it's hard to see what's happening on the screen. But if I could interrupt, I think that's the critical point. The focus needs to move on to those who covered up and facilitated these crimes. These crimes are evidence, they should be prosecuted. Those who rape and abuse children need to be held accountable before the courts. But we absolutely have to look to accountability to those who covered up those crimes. And of course, the context in France is broader even than that film. We've seen in the last month or two, the Vatican refused to accept the service of a subpoena to the current head of the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith to participate in a trial that's happening in France, the prosecution of one of the most senior clerics, a cardinal, who's been prosecuted in some form for being responsible, alleged to have been responsible for the cover-up of abuse in his own diocese. So the Vatican has
let me ask Father Laurent Stalla-Bourdillon.
Right, the request for the tribunal to hold the release of the film was juridic questions. It's over. I've seen the film, and I can say that I received the film with. I'm quite grateful as a priest, to have been able to see the film. It shows very clearly it has been a mistaken response to victims. Instead of being heard, the authority didn't want to hear them. It was a mistaken understanding and even a denial of what the wounds of the victims were. And it was a mistaken exercise of the authority. So it is good that this film is on screen now today. And on my side, I encourage my priest friends, to go and see it.
Tom Heneghan?
Yeah. There's a problem when you start to investigate these questions too closely, because you start to go up a hierarchy where there is still a lot of secrecy, and you could have effects that would also be not really to the favor of the Catholic Church. For example, in the case of Cardinal McCarrick, former Cardinal McCarrick, who was laicized, yes, just recently in Washington, it was not only the question of what did he do, but also why was he ever appointed an archbishop? Why was he ever appointed a cardinal? Who in those decisions are made in the Vatican? Who knew about him and who went along with this? It goes all the way up to the late Pope John Paul, who has now been declared a saint. This is very serious for the Catholic Church.
Yeah, decisions are made in the Vatican. Seema Gupta, as correspondent, very much behind closed doors. It's a culture all its own, the Vatican.
Yes, it is indeed. I mean, this culture of silence, and what they're hoping for now is a culture of disclosure. I have to say that one thing that really struck me just before this summit kicked off, when we were listening to the organizers and they were talking about what they did in putting all of this together, they actually said, we want to thank the victims. We want to thank them for speaking out. They said they wanted to thank the media for highlighting this issue over the many decades with the stories and the investigative reports that have been done. I have to admit that I was struck by those statements, that instead of not wanting to hear, putting it aside, let's deal with it internally, and the culture of cover up. We're hearing, thank you for bringing this story to light. So it's
And
a
so
first
and so the
step.
question, so the follow-up question to that is, and now what? Like, what are they going to do with that?
Exactly. I mean, are we expecting some miracle here with this summit, at the end of which are we actually going to see some big moves in terms of making things more open? Most Vatican watchers believe that that is highly unlikely. But again, it goes back to the fact of awareness. It goes back to the fact of make things more open, perhaps. I mean, we are seeing even the speeches made at the summit televised. In the past, we wouldn't see so much of that. It's little. It's not what the victims are hoping for. I know, and one can definitely feel the pain in that issue. But for people who have been observing the Vatican for many decades, they believe that this is some sign of opening up and some sign of making the bishops and priests, hopefully on the ground, more aware about this issue.
That culture of silence. Well, I wouldn't be doing my job as a journalist if I didn't ask you this question, Father, which is, at some point in time, is it because, well, it's all male culture in a secretive, celibate culture? At some point in time, is it not better to open the priesthood to marriage, to let women become priests?
Too many questions in your questions, but many things. Clearly, the fact that discernment on the sexual and psychological state of the priest has to be really taken very seriously before the man is being ordained priest. So, what the victims should expect from the church is that never a pedophile could be ordained ever a priest, and parents should be 100% sure that their child will be cared of and protected and not abused. It's just impossible. So we have to take all the questions, all the decisions to make sure, to ensure as much as we can.
Let me just be clear about my question. I'm not asking about homosexuality, which is an important question, or about, but more simply the idea that you have this culture in which the sort of predators can watch each other's backs more easily. It's more. It's about sex abuse. It's not about. It's not about sexuality here. We're talking about.
It's two things. The fact that the institution has to take in account presence of women. It has to be done. We have to be helped as men to be encouraged, to be corrected, to be looked on by women who gives their advice. Second thing, 80% of sexual abuse on minors are being committed by person who are married or in couple. So it's not a matter of being in celibacy. It's some other kind of questions. So celibacy is one question. Being a predator and being a sexual child abuser is another question.
Very briefly, Tom Heneghan.
I think there is no one root cause to this, and that is the big problem. Celibacy may play a part, sexual preference may play a part, clericalism and secrecy may play a part. All of that together is rolled up, and I think even with different predators, there might be different impulses there. So I think, I don't think that there are serious theological reasons to end celibacy or to extend the priesthood to women, but it will take a very long time in the Catholic Church if that ever comes about, because the Catholic Church just does not move. Remember, it goes back to the Roman Empire. It does not move very quickly, and things like that will take a long, long time.
All right, Tom Heneghan, I want to thank you. I want to thank Father Laurent Stalla-Bourdillon for being with us. I want to thank as well Colm O'Gorman for being with us from Dublin, correspondent Seema Gupta in Rome. Stay with us. Media Watch is next. And we say hello to James Creed. We were just talking about that film which came out on screens here in France on Wednesday.
That's right. That was one of like 2 or 3 different stories that have been making headlines in the last week. sort of peripherally related to peripheral issues around the summit. Take a look at The Guardian. This is just to show the extent to which the Catholic Church is really having to deal with all of these taboos that are surfacing again and again and again, and it's sort of incessant in terms of the different headlines about various issues. Vatican reveals it has secret rules for priests who father children, and again here, despite the fact that those rules weren't revealed, they're secret, apparently it is a larger phenomenon than one might have even thought. Then the New York Times, amongst others, dealing with the issue of homosexuality, which of course comes back a lot. This is related to a book by a French author, a French sociologist, Frédéric Martel, translated into 8 languages, talking about a very high percentage of homosexuals in the priesthood in the Vatican itself. And in any case, you have headlines like this: it is not a closet, it is a cage. So you have the whole issue of high percentage of homosexuality in those in the priesthood, priests who father children, and then this film, François Ozon, that puts again the spotlight, Grace of God, won a prize in Berlin, Silver Bear, of one particular story of abuse in France. I mean, this is years and years and years of drip, drip, drip revelations about this, and this is the most recent high-profile, I suppose, dramatization of that in France. There was even an attempt to get it off the screens because for legal reasons, etc. And you can see that there have been interviews by our own channel as well with one of the victims of the priest who is at the centre of that story. So it's sort of incessant, whether it be in dramatization form, whether it be in book form, whether it be other revelations about. And I suppose that it's just interesting to see the timing of all of that. There was one, the Archbishop of Strasbourg, reacting to that in the French Catholic paper Le Croix, saying that he thinks that it is an opportunity for the Church to question itself, this film by François Ozon. So that's before we even get to the whole issue that has had so many gather in the Vatican right now. The Catholic Church is still making excuses for paedophilia. This is Peter Stanford writing in The Guardian. He's the former editor of the Catholic Herald newspaper. Now, despite saying that, he looks, for example, at how Pope John Paul back in the 90s referred to paedophile priests as being a few bad apples, and I suppose we've seen that it's perhaps slightly larger phenomenon than that. Yeah, then you had, I think, Pope Benedict who blamed it on the devil, or no, that was Pope Francis, blamed it on the devil, a malign force tempting otherwise good priests to sexually abuse children. So again, I think this is, Peter Stanford is saying that there has been a failure in the past to really look the issue straight in the face in terms of a question of responsibility. But he says here, is there really any possibility that this gathering in Rome might just be a road to Damascus moment for Catholicism in a crisis that has shaken it to its core? Naively, he says, I continue to hope so. It will involve rethinking an entire approach to sexualities that is peculiar, punitive, and often plain perverse. So that's, I suppose, could you call that an optimistic take on things? And again, I suppose, just very quickly, a lot of talk of forgiveness. That is usually, I suppose, one of the stock words around this from the Pope. He evoked also the Padre Pio and his whole notion, Catholic saint, of forgiveness. But I think that the message that was most, there was this gesture of hand kissing as well, but the gesture that I think got a lot of attention was Cardinal Tagle, who spoke about suffering, in fact, not just, he didn't speak about forgiveness, he spoke about the recognition of suffering, he spoke about the wounds of Christ, so using the imagery of the Church and the imagery of Christ. He said that the wounds of Christ hold the memory of the suffering of innocence. And he said that with tears in his eyes, and I think it was a moment that touched many. And I suppose I'll just finish with this cartoon in Le Monde, which speaks about the breaking of a taboo. And you can see their stained glass window kind of evoking certain images, but the breaking of that taboo.
Many thanks for that, James Creedon. I want to thank our panel once again. Thank you for joining us here in the France 24 debate.